Have you ever witnessed the precise moment a man's world shatters? Not with a bang, but with a quiet, courteous greeting. Tonight, we follow Adrian Vance, a man who believed he was the master of his universe, dining with his young mistress in the city's most exclusive 5-star restaurant. He's celebrating a secret victory, wrapped in the gleam of crystal and the thrill of an illicit whisper. But in a world of power and secrets, the most dangerous person is the one you underestimate. What happens when the man who thinks he owns the world discovers he doesn't even own the table he's sitting at? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a story of a spectacular fall from grace. Adrian Vance believed the world was a chessboard, and he was born a king. At 48, he was a senior partner at the prestigious law firm Sterling and Vance, a name he'd added himself after a particularly ruthless but brilliant corporate takeover case a decade ago. He moved through life with the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no and truly meant it. His suits were bespoke, his watch was a Patek Philippe, and his confidence was a weapon he wielded with surgical precision. Tonight, that confidence was intoxicating. Seated across from him at L'Étoile Céleste, the city's most coveted reservation, was Emma Sanders. At 26, she was everything his wife was not. Emma was a supernova of ambition and raw, unfiltered admiration. A junior associate at his firm, she looked at him with a hunger that fed his ego more than any 3 Michelin-star meal ever could. Her dress was the color of a siren's call, a stark red against the restaurant's muted palette of cream and gold. "I still can't believe you got this table, Adrian," she whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the soaring ceilings and the quiet ballet of the waitstaff. "They say the waitlist is over a year long." Adrian swirled the deep crimson wine in his glass, a 1998 Chateau Margaux he'd selected without a glance at the price. "The world is divided into 2 types of people, Emma," he said, his voice a low, self-assured rumble. "Those who wait and those who are worth waiting for. We," he gestured between them with his glass, "are the latter." He was celebrating, not just the affair, which had been a thrilling diversion for the past 6 months, but a professional coup. He had just successfully orchestrated the hostile takeover of a smaller but innovative tech firm, a move that would earn him a bonus with enough zeros to look like a phone number. It was a victory built on cunning, late nights, and a complete disregard for the professional lives he had just dismantled. His wife, Eleanor, would never understand. Eleanor, with her quiet elegance and her predictable life. She was beautiful, yes, in a classical, museum-quality way. She ran their home in Greenwich with flawless efficiency, hosted charity galas where she charmed donors with her gentle grace, and raised their 2 college-aged children who were now successful extensions of the Vance legacy. To Adrian, she had become part of the scenery, beautiful, necessary for appearances, but ultimately static. He loved her, he supposed, in the way one loves a valuable portrait that has hung on the wall for 20 years. You appreciate its quality, but you no longer truly see it. "To us," Emma said, raising her champagne flute, "and to your brilliant win. You're a legend at the firm. They're calling you the Shark." Adrian smiled, a tight, controlled expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sharks have to keep moving, or they die. Let that be your first lesson." He relished the role of mentor, especially when it was mixed with the thrill of the forbidden. He had told Eleanor he was in a late-night negotiation in the city, a plausible lie she would accept without question. She never questioned him. It was part of their unspoken contract. He provided a life of unparalleled luxury, and she provided a seamless, drama-free existence. In his mind, it was a fair trade. He felt a pang of something, not guilt, but a fleeting inconvenience, as he pictured her at home, probably reading a book by the fire, blissfully unaware. The thought was strangely comforting. Her ignorance was the bedrock upon which he built his secret world. The sommelier approached, his deference bordering on worship. The first course arrived, a delicate mosaic of seared scallops with a truffle vinaigrette. Every detail of the evening was perfect, a symphony of power, wealth, and desire orchestrated by him, for him. He leaned across the table, taking Emma's hand. Her skin was warm, her nails immaculate. "After this," he murmured, "I have a suite at the Regis. A bottle of Dom Perignon is already on ice." Emma's eyes glittered with a combination of excitement and calculation. This was it. This was the life she'd read about, dreamed about. She was no fool. She knew what she represented to Adrian. She was youth, adoration, a trophy. But she was also smart. She was learning from him, absorbing his lessons on power and leverage. For now she was happy to play her part. As they savoured their main course, a perfectly roasted duck with a cherry reduction, Adrian felt a sense of absolute dominion. He was at the pinnacle of his career, with a beautiful young woman captivated by his every word in the best restaurant in the city. He owned this moment. He owned this world. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the way the maître d' stood a little straighter near the kitchen entrance. He didn't see the brief, hushed conversation between the manager and the head waiter. All he saw was his own reflection in Emma's admiring eyes, the king of his own making, untouchable and supreme. The universe, it seemed, was unfolding exactly as he had written it. The grand architect of l'Étoile Céleste's culinary fame was Chef Antoine Dubois. A legend in the gastronomic world, Dubois was a temperamental genius, known for rarely leaving his kitchen during service. His appearance in the dining room was an event, a benediction reserved for royalty, visiting dignitaries, or titans of industry he personally admired. So when the tall, imposing figure in pristine white chef's attire emerged from the kitchen doors, a hush fell over the nearby tables. Diners paused, forks hovering mid-air, their conversations tapering off into respectful silence. Adrian's ego preened. He assumed, with the unshakable certainty of the perpetually entitled, that the chef was coming for him. Perhaps someone at the restaurant had recognized him from the financial papers and alerted the staff. It was only fitting. He gave Emma a knowing smirk. "Prepare to be impressed. Chef Dubois is a true artist." He subtly adjusted his tie, ready to receive the master's praise for his discerning palate and, by extension, his superior status. Chef Dubois moved with an unnerving calm, his gaze sweeping across the room not with arrogance, but with the quiet authority of a captain on his own ship. His eyes, dark and intense, passed over several tables before they settled on theirs. He navigated the space between the tables, his expression unreadable. He stopped directly beside Adrian. Adrian prepared his gracious nod, the one he used for inferiors who were good at their jobs. But the chef wasn't looking at him. His gaze was fixed on Emma, but not on her face. It was directed at Adrian's phone, which he had carelessly placed on the table, screen up. The screen was dark, but a moment before, he had received a text from his daughter, and the wallpaper had lit up, a family photo from last summer in the Hamptons. Adrian, his 2 children, and Eleanor, all smiling, the very picture of domestic bliss. Chef Dubois' stern face softened, almost imperceptibly, into a look of warm, genuine respect. He inclined his head, not to Adrian, but towards the phone. "Bonsoir," the chef said, his voice a low, cultured baritone with a distinct French accent. He then looked directly at Adrian, though it felt as if he were looking straight through him. "Monsieur, please forgive the intrusion." His eyes then flickered to Emma, a brief, dismissive glance that made her shrink back slightly in her seat. He turned his attention fully back to Adrian. "I was in my office reviewing the quarterly reports and I saw your reservation name," the chef continued, his tone polite but formal. "I must confess, I did not recognize Vance." Adrian's chest tightened. A prickle of confusion, then irritation. How could he not recognize the name? It was plastered across the city's financial district. "But then," Chef Dubois said, a small, deferential smile touching his lips as he gestured again towards the phone's now dark screen. "My manager pointed out your table. I saw the photograph. I recognized her immediately." Adrian's mind was a blank slate. "Huh? Who was she?" The chef clasped his hands behind his back. He stood straighter, his voice resonating with a profound and personal respect that Adrian had expected for himself. "Please, monsieur," Chef Dubois said, his words clear and precise, cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "When you speak with Mrs. Vance, send her my deepest regards, and tell her the new autumn menu, which she personally approved, is a great success." The world stopped. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the soft music, it all faded into a roaring silence in Adrian's ears. Mrs. Vance, Eleanor, approved the menu? What was he talking about? Eleanor's idea of culinary adventure was trying a new brand of olive oil. Emma stared, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth, her expression a mask of pure confusion. "Mrs. Vance," she mouthed silently. Adrian felt a cold dread, slick and oily, begin to creep up his spine. He tried to form a coherent thought, to dismiss this as some bizarre misunderstanding. "I think there's been a mistake," Adrian managed, his voice sounding thin and reedy to his own ears. Chef Dubois raised an eyebrow. "A mistake, monsieur?" "I do not think so." He seemed to finally take in the scene, the expensive wine, the beautiful young woman who was clearly not Mrs. Vance, the guilty tension now radiating from Adrian in palpable waves. A flicker of understanding, and perhaps disdain, crossed the chef's face. He delivered the final, fatal blow with the simple, devastating courtesy of a man stating a fact. "There is no mistake. We are always honored to serve the husband of our founder and main shareholder. Without Eleanor, l'Étoile Céleste would not exist." The words hung in the air, each one a perfectly polished stone, dropped into the placid pool of Adrian's reality, the ripples spreading outwards, shattering everything. Main, shareholder, Eleanor. The chef gave a final, stiff nod. "Enjoy your evening," he said, the words now laced with an unmistakable irony. He turned on his heel and walked back towards the kitchen, leaving a crater of silent, catastrophic revelation in his wake. Adrian stared at the empty space where the chef had stood. He felt Emma's eyes on him, no longer full of adoration, but of sharp, questioning disbelief. He looked down at his plate, at the rich, expensive food that now looked like ashes. The world he had owned just 5 minutes ago had been a fiction. He was not a king dining in a castle, he commanded. He was a fool, eating a meal in his wife's house, a house he never even knew she had built. The silence that descended upon table 12 was heavier than any lead shield. It absorbed sound, light, and air. Emma slowly placed her fork on the plate, with a quiet click that sounded like a gunshot in the cavernous quiet. She stared at Adrian, her lipstick-stained lips parted slightly. The gears were turning behind her eyes, the quick, frantic calculations of a person realizing they had allied themselves with the wrong side of a war they didn't even know was being fought. Her restaurant? Emma's voice was barely a whisper, stripped of its earlier flirtatious cadence. It was flat, accusatory. What the hell was that, Adrian? Adrian couldn't answer. His mind was a frantic scramble of denial and confusion. Eleanor? A shareholder? The founder? It was impossible. Eleanor's money was family money, old and respectable, managed by a stuffy old advisor named Mr. Abernathy. Her portfolio was a boring collection of blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds. Her work was charity auctions and garden committees. It didn't make sense. It was a mistake. It had to be. "He's confused," Adrian said, the words feeling like sand in his mouth. He must have mistaken her for another patron. "He knew her name, Adrian. He said she approved the menu," Emma shot back, her voice gaining an edge of panic. "He called her the main shareholder. People don't make mistakes like that." The spell was broken. The romantic, powerful illusion of the evening had evaporated, leaving behind a harsh, fluorescent reality. The duck tasted bitter. The wine felt like acid in his stomach. He saw the couple at the next table steal a glance at them, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The entire restaurant, which had felt like his personal stage, now felt like a courtroom, and he was the one on trial. "Check, please," Adrian said to a passing waiter, his voice tight and strained. He couldn't stay here another second. He threw his black Amex card on the table without looking at the bill. He needed to get out. He needed to get home. He needed to confront Eleanor and unravel this absurdity. The drive back to Greenwich was the longest 45 minutes of Adrian Vance's life. Emma sat in the passenger seat of his Mercedes, ramrod straight, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The vibrant red of her dress now seemed garish and cheap in the sterile glow of the dashboard lights. The charged, electric silence of the restaurant had followed them into the car, growing more oppressive with every passing mile. "So is it true?" she finally asked, as they sped along the Merritt Parkway, the trees outside a dark, unforgiving blur. "Of course not," he snapped, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "It's preposterous." But even as he said it, a sliver of doubt wedged its way into his certainty. He thought of Eleanor's quiet trips into the city, which he'd always dismissed as shopping sprees or museum visits, her occasional lunches with old family friends he'd never met. The sealed, official-looking documents that sometimes arrived for her, which he'd assumed were related to her charity boards. A mosaic of ignored details began to form a picture he didn't want to see. "Because if it is true, Adrian..." Emma trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. If it was true, then he wasn't the shark he claimed to be. He was a clueless husband, and she had hitched her wagon to a falling star. Her ambition was a far more powerful force than any affection she had for him, and right now her internal compass was screaming that she had made a very, very bad bet. "I'm the senior partner at one of the top law firms in New York," he said, more to convince himself than her. "I'm the one who makes the money. I'm the one with the power. Eleanor, she plans parties." Emma didn't respond. She just stared out the window. The trust between them, a fragile thing built on a currency of power and admiration, had been irrevocably broken. He was no longer the all-powerful mentor. He was just a man who had been publicly, spectacularly exposed as ignorant of his own wife's life. He pulled up to her apartment building in Stamford, the engine humming in the tense quiet. He didn't make a move to get out. The planned night of passion at the Regis felt like a fantasy from another lifetime. "Are you coming up?" Emma asked, her voice devoid of any real invitation. "I need to go home," he said. "I need to sort this out." She just nodded, a quick, sharp movement. She opened the door and got out, not even looking back at him as she walked towards the entrance, a flash of red disappearing into the night. He was already a liability. The final 20 minutes of the drive to his own home were a blur of frantic, cycling thoughts. Each one was more alarming than the last. If l'Étoile Céleste was hers, what else was hers? He mentally ran through their assets. The Greenwich house was in both their names, but she had put down the deposit from her inheritance. The Hamptons Beach House? A gift from her parents on their 10th anniversary. The art collection? Mostly pieces she had selected, purchased at auctions he never bothered to attend. He had always seen her inheritance as a quaint supplement to his own vast earnings, a little pot of money that paid for her clothes and hobbies. The idea that she had not just preserved it, but had cultivated it into something that could secretly dwarf his own success, was a fundamental shock to his system. It rearranged the entire hierarchy of their marriage, of his world. He turned onto his private, tree-lined driveway. The house was magnificent, a sprawling colonial beacon of stone and light. It was his fortress, the ultimate symbol of his success. Tonight, for the first time, it felt alien. He felt like a trespasser. He parked the car in the garage next to Eleanor's Range Rover. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation. He would be calm. He would be rational. He would dismantle her little fantasy, whatever it was. He was Adrian Vance. He controlled the narrative. He walked into the house through the mudroom. The lights were low. The air was still. And sitting in the grand living room, in a single armchair illuminated by a soft reading lamp, was Eleanor. She wasn't reading. She was waiting for him. She looked up as he entered, her expression not angry, not hurt, but unnervingly calm. It was the look of a queen, waiting for a disloyal subject to approach the throne. Eleanor Vance looked as if she were sculpted from moonlight and steel. She wore simple silk pajamas. Her silver blonde hair was tied back loosely, and her face was free of makeup. There were no signs of tears, no red-rimmed eyes, no trembling lips. The only thing that betrayed the placid surface was the unnerving stillness in her posture. She held a crystal glass of what looked like water, her fingers wrapped around it, with a steady, deliberate grace. Adrian stopped in the doorway of the living room, the grand space suddenly feeling like a cage. The scent of lemon verbena and old books, the familiar comforts of his home, now felt like a carefully constructed trap. "You're home late," she said. Her voice was calm, a quiet melody that carried no hint of the storm he had expected. It was more terrifying than any scream. "The negotiations ran over," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. It was an automatic response, the muscle memory of his deceit. Eleanor took a slow sip of her water. "I'm sure they did," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I trust you closed the deal." The subtle emphasis on the deal sent a chill down his spine. This was not a conversation about his work. He walked further into the room, shedding the persona of the powerful lawyer and feeling, for the first time in decades, like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "I was at l'Étoile Céleste tonight," he said, deciding a direct assault was the only strategy. "The chef, Antoine Dubois, came to my table." "Oh?" Eleanor's expression didn't change. "Antoine is a dear. So passionate. I hope he wasn't interrupting your dinner." The word hung there, heavy with unspoken meaning. "He seemed to be under some bizarre impression," Adrian pressed on, his voice rising slightly. "He seemed to think that you own the restaurant, that you're the main shareholder." He waited for her to laugh, to dismiss it as a ludicrous misunderstanding. He braced for the confusion, the denial that would restore his world to its proper order. Instead, Eleanor simply nodded. "I'm not the main shareholder, Adrian. That would imply there are others of significance." She set her glass down on the small table beside her with a soft click. "I am the sole owner. L'Étoile Céleste is a wholly owned subsidiary of Northwood Capital." Northwood Capital? The name was unfamiliar. A phantom corporation. "What the hell is Northwood Capital, Eleanor?" "It's my holding company," she said, her tone as matter-of-fact as if she were discussing the grocery list. "I founded it 15 years ago." 15 years. The number hit him like a physical blow. 15 years of his triumphs, his promotions, his ego. And for 15 years, she had been building something in silence, a secret empire he had never even suspected. "With what money?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Your trust fund? The pittance your grandfather left you?" For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Eleanor's face. Not anger, but a profound, weary disappointment. "My grandfather, as you so dismissively recall, was a brilliant man. He didn't leave me a pittance, Adrian. He left me seed money. And more importantly, he left me with the single best piece of advice I ever received. Never let a man, especially your husband, be the sole architect of your security." She stood up, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to fill the room, diminishing him. She walked over to the grand mahogany desk in the corner, a piece of furniture he'd always considered ornamental. From a locked drawer, she retrieved a slim, leather-bound ledger. "You saw my life as a hobby," she said, placing the ledger on the coffee table between them. "The charities, the galas, the ladies who lunch. You saw a bored housewife. But those ladies are board members of some of the country's largest corporations. The charity events were the best networking opportunities in the world. While you were impressing junior associates, I was having quiet conversations with venture capitalists, tech innovators, and real estate developers." She opened the ledger. It was filled with neat, precise handwriting, detailing acquisitions, investments, and profit margins. It was a language he understood intimately, but seeing it in her hand, in his own living room, felt like a hallucination. "L'Étoile Céleste was one of my earliest passion projects," she explained, her voice gaining strength. "Antoine was a brilliant sous chef with a vision, but no backing. I bought a failing bistro in a prime location and gave him total creative control. It was a risk, a very profitable one." She flipped a page. "The commercial property on 57th Street, the one your firm tried to broker a deal on last year? Northwood owns it. The seed funding for a biotech firm, Synergen, that just went public? That was me. The list is extensive." Adrian sank into the couch opposite her, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He felt dizzy, nauseous. His entire marriage, his perception of his wife, of his own dominance, had been a lie. He hadn't been the provider, the king protecting his queen. He had been the jester, blissfully ignorant, living in a castle she had built and owned around him. "Why?" he whispered, the question a raw plea. "Why hide all of this from me?" Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a wife, but a strategist. A woman of formidable intelligence and even more formidable patience. "Because I saw who you were becoming, Adrian," she said, her voice softening, but with a sharp, cutting edge of truth. "I saw your arrogance grow with every bonus. I saw how you spoke to people you deemed beneath you. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that if you knew about my success, you would have tried to control it, to absorb it into your own narrative, to make my achievements your own. My finances were my independence, my one space that you couldn't conquer." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. And I knew, one day, I would need it. The implication was as clear as the crystal glass on the table. She had known about his infidelities. Not just Emma. All of them. "I got a call tonight, Adrian," she said, her voice now cold and final. "From Antoine. He was concerned. He described your dinner companion. He has a very good eye for detail. He felt it was his duty to inform me of the guests enjoying my hospitality in my flagship restaurant." She closed the ledger. The quiet, decisive sound echoed the closing of a door on their life together. "So, no," she said, answering his unspoken, desperate hope that this was all a nightmare. "It wasn't a mistake. The only mistake was your assumption that the woman you married 25 years ago was the same woman sitting before you today." The days that followed were a masterclass in controlled demolition. Adrian, the self-proclaimed shark, found himself in a vast, unknown ocean, facing a creature whose depths he couldn't possibly fathom. His first instinct, honed by years of legal battles, was to fight back. He would hire the best divorce attorney in the city, contest everything, and expose Eleanor's deception. He made the call to Marcus Thorne, a pit bull of a lawyer known for eviscerating spouses on the witness stand. Their initial meeting took place in Thorne's stark, modernist office overlooking Central Park. "So your wife has a secret portfolio," Thorne said, leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Cute. We'll subpoena the records for Northwood Capital, get a full accounting. We'll argue she hid assets, a breach of marital trust. We can leverage that." Adrian felt a flicker of his old confidence return. "Exactly. She's been deceitful. This entire marriage has been a sham." Thorne's paralegal entered the room 3 days later, his face pale. He placed a thick file on Thorne's desk. "We got the preliminary findings on Northwood Capital, Marcus." Thorne opened the file. As he read, his smirk slowly vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. He looked up at Adrian. His expression completely changed. "Adrian," he said, his voice flat. "We have a problem." He slid a document across the table. It was a copy of their prenuptial agreement, the one Adrian had insisted upon 25 years ago. He had drafted it himself, a work of art designed to protect his future earnings from her family money. He barely remembered the specifics, only his smug satisfaction at its ironclad nature. Thorne tapped a clause in the middle of page 4. Section 3, paragraph B. All assets, properties, and revenue streams derived from premarital holdings and inheritances, including any and all growth, capital gains, or new ventures funded by said holdings, shall remain the sole and separate property of the inheriting spouse. Adrian's blood ran cold. I wrote that to protect myself from her claims on my future firm partnership. "Well, you did a hell of a job, Adrian," Thorne said, a note of grudging admiration in his voice. "It's airtight. You protected her just as much as you protected yourself. Northwood Capital was funded entirely by her inheritance. Every stock, every property, every last Michelin star. It's all hers. Untouchable." The second blow came at work. The managing partners of Sterling and Vance called an emergency meeting. Robert Sterling, a man whose family had founded the firm a century ago, sat at the head of the table, his face like granite. "Adrian, we've been informed that we are being dropped as counsel for Omnicorp," Sterling said, without preamble. Adrian was stunned. Omnicorp was one of their biggest clients, a massive real estate conglomerate. He personally handled their portfolio. On what grounds? Their CEO loves me. Their CEO was just forced into early retirement, another partner, David Brown, added. The board enacted a hostile takeover last week, a new majority shareholder. Adrian didn't need to ask. The dread pooling in his gut gave him the answer. The new controlling entity is a holding company I'd never heard of before, Sterling said, consulting his notes. A firm called Northwood Capital. The room was silent. Everyone was looking at him. The story of his humiliation at L'Étoile Céleste had already begun to circulate through the city's elite circles like a virus. It was a tale too delicious not to share. The arrogant Adrian Vance, cuckolded not by another man, but by his wife's balance sheet. Now it wasn't just embarrassing, it was catastrophic. His wife was not only divorcing him, she was actively dismantling his career by acquiring his clients. It wasn't business, it was a targeted assassination. His fall from grace at the firm was swift-io and brutal. The whispers in the hallways turned to open speculation. He had become a liability, a walking punchline. The shark was now just a fish out of water, gasping for air. Within a month, he was politely but firmly asked to take an extended leave of absence, the corporate equivalent of being exiled. Desperate and isolated, he did the one thing he thought he could control. He called Emma. He had left her a few rambling voicemails in the initial days, which had gone unanswered. This time she picked up. "Adrian," she said, her voice cool and distant. "Emma, I need to see you," he pleaded, the sound of his own desperation sickening him. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she said. "I heard about Omnicorp. I heard about everything." There was a pause. "I've been reassigned, by the way, to David Brown's team. It's a great opportunity." Of course she had. She was a survivor. She had cut her losses and attached herself to the next rising power. He was old news, a sinking ship she had abandoned without a second thought. "I made you, Emma," he snarled, the last vestiges of his pride lashing out. "You were nothing before I noticed you." "And that's the second lesson you taught me, Adrian," she replied, her voice laced with ice. "Never tie your entire future to one person. Diversify your assets." She hung up. He was truly alone. His home, now a monument to his ignorance, was being methodically emptied by movers under the calm supervision of Eleanor's assistant. He was relegated to a small guest room, a temporary resident in his own life. The art was created, the expensive furniture shrouded in white sheets. He was living in a ghost house. One evening, he found Eleanor in the library, overseeing the packing of her books. She moved with a purpose and energy he had never seen before. She was no longer just elegant. She was formidable. "You're destroying me," he said, his voice hollow. "Wasn't the divorce enough? You're taking my career, my reputation." She turned to him, her eyes clear and resolute. "I am not destroying you, Adrian. I am protecting my assets. Omnicorp was poorly managed and undervalued. It was a sound business decision. The fact that it was your client was an incidental benefit." She placed a book into a box. "You built your career on the idea of the hostile takeover. You celebrated the destruction of other people's companies for your own gain. You can't be surprised when the same principles are applied to you. The only difference is my takeover isn't hostile. It's simply efficient." He saw it then. This wasn't an act of revenge. Revenge was messy, emotional. This was a strategic realignment. In Eleanor's world, he had been a bad investment, a liability on the books, and she was simply, coolly, and completely divesting. Eleanor had not set out to build an empire out of spite. It had started as an act of self-preservation. 25 years ago, she was a promising art history graduate with a keen eye and a quiet ambition. She loved Adrian Vance with a fierce, all-consuming passion. He was brilliant, driven, and charismatic. She saw the man he could be, not just the man he was. Her grandfather, Arthur Pendleton, a gruff, self-made man who'd built his fortune in manufacturing, had pulled her aside a week before her wedding. He'd handed her a check for $100,000, a significant sum in those days. "This is not for a house or a car, Eleanor," he'd said, his voice raspy. "This is your go-to-hell fund. Adrian is a wolf, a fine wolf, a strong wolf. But a wolf is always a wolf. He will provide for you, but he will also own you. This money ensures that you always own yourself." She'd taken his advice to heart. While Adrian was billing 80-hour weeks, climbing the corporate ladder, Eleanor was in the public library, devouring books on investing, market trends, and finance. She used her art history background to her advantage, learning to see patterns and predict value where others saw only chaos. She started small, investing in emerging artists whose work she believed in, selling their pieces years later for exponential profits. She formed Northwood Capital with a quiet, unassuming lawyer. Not a shark like Adrian, but a meticulous tortoise of a man who specialized in trusts and discreet wealth management. Her initial focus was art and real estate, tangible assets she understood. She bought undervalued commercial properties in neighborhoods just on the cusp of gentrification, holding on to them until their value skyrocketed. Her social life became her intelligence network. At charity galas, while Adrian was holding court, Eleanor was listening. She'd listen to the wives of tech moguls complain about their husbands' latest frustrations with microchip suppliers, and she'd make a note to invest in a rival company. She'd hear a biotech CEO, his guard down after 2 glasses of wine, excitedly murmur about a promising new drug trial, and she'd buy stock in his small, unknown firm the next day. She collected information like she collected art, discerningly, quietly, and with an eye for future value. The turning point, the moment her strategy shifted from self-preservation to strategic fortification, came about 10 years into their marriage. She had found a receipt for a diamond bracelet from a jeweler she had never frequented, tucked into the pocket of a suit she was taking to the cleaners. It was dated the day after their anniversary. He had given her a first-edition book. The bracelet was not for her. The discovery didn't break her heart in a fiery, dramatic way. It was a slow, cold cracking of a foundation. It was the confirmation of a suspicion she had long harbored. Adrian's late nights weren't always about work. His business trips weren't always with colleagues. The wolf was being a wolf. She could have confronted him. She could have screamed, cried, and demanded a divorce. But she saw the larger picture. She had 2 young children. She had a life she had carefully built. And she realized with chilling clarity that Adrian's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He didn't see her. He saw a reflection of his own success, a beautiful, passive wife who managed his home. This invisibility was her greatest strength. From that day on, Northwood Capital became her fortress. She diversified aggressively. She hired a team of brilliant, hungry analysts, people who, like her, were constantly underestimated. They moved into tech, green energy, and international logistics. She operated with a simple, ruthless philosophy learned from her grandfather. Buy what is undervalued, hold until it is essential, and never let emotion cloud a business judgment. L'Étoile Céleste was a rare indulgence, a project born of a genuine love for Antoine Dubois' artistry. But even that was a sound business decision. She knew the city's elite craved exclusivity and perfection, and she gave it to them, creating a brand that was both prestigious and immensely profitable. She approved the menus because she had an impeccable palate. She reviewed the quarterly reports because she was a meticulous CEO. She never flaunted her wealth. She continued to live the life Adrian expected of her. The Range Rover was practical. The Greenwich house was for the children. Her clothes were elegant, but not ostentatious. It was the perfect camouflage. She allowed him to believe he was the sole source of their opulent lifestyle, all while knowing that her own net worth had quietly eclipsed his by a factor of 10. When she finally decided to act, it wasn't because of Emma. Emma was just a symptom of the disease, a younger, more brazen version of the others who had come before her. The final straw was the hostile takeover Adrian had just completed, the one he had been celebrating. Eleanor knew the founder of the small tech firm he had dismantled. He was a decent man with a family, and Adrian had ruined him with a callousness that turned her stomach. She realized Adrian's arrogance had curdled into something cruel. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to destroy, and she, by her silence and complicity, had enabled him. Her plan was not born of emotion, but of necessity. It was like pruning a diseased limb to save the tree. She started by contacting the board members of Omnicorp, many of whom she knew socially. She presented them with a deal that was too good to refuse, acquiring a controlling stake in the company with surgical precision. She knew that cutting off his biggest client would cripple his standing at the firm. The dinner at L'Étoile Céleste was an accident, a gift from the universe. Antoine's loyalty and sharp eyes had simply accelerated the timeline, turning a quiet, strategic maneuver into a public spectacle. It was messy, but effective. Now, as she packed the last of her books in the library, she felt no triumph. She felt a quiet, somber resolution. She was not a vengeful wife. She was a CEO protecting her life's work from a reckless partner. The marriage had failed long ago. The business of their life together was simply, finally, being dissolved. She was closing a chapter, not just on Adrian, but on the quiet, invisible woman she had been forced to be for so long. Eleanor Vance was finally ready to step out of the shadows and run her empire in the light. 6 months later, the name Adrian Vance was little more than a ghost in the hallowed halls of Sterling and Vance. The Vance was in the process of being legally removed from the firm's name, an erasure as complete as it was humiliating. After being forced out, Adrian had tried to find a position at a rival firm, but the story of his downfall was legendary. He was seen as a man who had been monumentally outplayed, not by a competitor, but by his own wife. No one wanted to hire a lawyer who had missed the biggest loophole of his life in his own prenuptial agreement. He ended up taking a job as in-house counsel for a mid-level insurance company in New Jersey. The pay was a fraction of what he used to make. He sold his Mercedes and now drove a sensible sedan. He lived in a sterile, rented condo that smelled of fresh paint and regret. The bespoke suits hung in his closet like costumes from a former life. He had lost the money, the power, the reputation, but the most crushing loss was the respect. He was no longer a shark. He was a cautionary tale told over expensive lunches he could no longer afford. Emma Sanders, true to form, landed on her feet. Her association with Adrian was a brief, embarrassing footnote, quickly overshadowed by her fierce ambition. She became David Brown's protégé, working tirelessly and making herself indispensable. She was on the fast track to a junior partnership, her lesson learned. Power was the only real currency, and she would never again misjudge its source. Eleanor, however, blossomed. With the divorce finalized and her business empire now fully in the open, she became one of an emerging class of female titans in the city. Forbes ran a feature on her. The Silent Mogul, How Eleanor Vance Built a Fortune in Plain Sight. She was praised for her shrewd instincts and her quiet, dignified approach, Northwood Capital became a major player, its name synonymous with smart, strategic growth. She didn't erase Adrian from her life entirely. She was, above all, a pragmatist. She ensured he had a decent settlement, enough to live comfortably, if not lavishly. She did it not out of affection, but for her children. She didn't want their father to be destitute. She just wanted him to be powerless. One crisp autumn evening, a year after that fateful dinner, Eleanor found herself with a rare, free hour. On a whim, she directed her driver to l'Étoile Céleste. She walked in, not as a silent owner, but as herself. The maître d' rushed to greet her, his deference genuine. "Madame Vance, an honor. Your usual table." She smiled. "No, Michel, a different one tonight. The small one by the window, a table for one." She sat, observing the room. It was full, as always, the air humming with the quiet confidence of the city's elite. She saw couples like she and Adrian had been, the powerful man, the adoring younger woman. She felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of a distant, clinical sadness for the woman she had once been. Chef Antoine Dubois came out from the kitchen, his face breaking into a wide, warm smile when he saw her. He didn't bow or scrape. He approached her as an equal, a partner. "Eleanor," he said, kissing her on both cheeks. "It is good to see you here, enjoying your success." "It's good to be here, Antoine," she replied. "The new menu is a triumph, by the way." "It is what we do," he said with a simple shrug. "We create." As he left, her gaze drifted across the dining room and settled on a man sitting alone at the bar, nursing a whiskey. He was slumped slightly, his shoulders heavy. His suit was well made, but it didn't fit him the way it used to. It was Adrian. He hadn't seen her. He was just staring into his glass, a man adrift. He looked older, smaller, stripped of the aura of invincibility that had once defined him. For a fleeting moment, she felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of peace. His fate was his own making. She turned her attention back to the window, to the glittering city lights beyond. She had built a world for herself, not in opposition to him, but in spite of him. She had done it silently, patiently, and brilliantly. Her waiter arrived with a glass of champagne. "A celebration, Madame Vance?" he asked. Eleanor looked out at the vast, sparkling city that was hers to conquer, and then she looked at the reflection of the strong, serene woman in the window. "Yes, Paul," she said, her voice clear and sure. "A celebration of a new beginning." Adrian's gaze lifted from the amber depths of his Macallan 18, a ghost of a former habit he maintained despite its cost. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, projecting a memory onto the present. But it was her, Eleanor. She was seated alone at a prime table by the window, a single flute of champagne catching the light. She looked radiant, not with the manicured beauty he had taken for granted, but with a serene, self-contained energy that seemed to bend the room's atmosphere around her. His first impulse was to shrink, to turn away and quickly pay his bill, escaping into the anonymity of the night. Shame, a foreign and corrosive emotion, washed over him. He was an intruder in her world, a pathetic footnote in the story of her triumph. He had come here tonight out of a morbid sense of nostalgia, wanting to see the place where his life had so spectacularly detonated, and now the architect of that detonation was just 50 feet away. But then a different feeling emerged. Not anger, not defiance. Those emotions had burned out long ago, leaving only the cold ash of regret. It was a weary curiosity, a need perhaps for a final closing statement in a trial that had concluded months ago. He pushed himself off the bar stool, the motion feeling heavy and deliberate. He straightened his tie, a nervous tick from a life he no longer led, and began the long walk across the dining room. Eleanor saw him approaching. There was no surprise in her eyes, no alarm. She simply watched him come, her expression as calm and unreadable as a deep lake. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the empty chair across from her. An invitation. Or perhaps a summons. He reached the table, his hands feeling clumsy and useless at his sides. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse. "Adrian," she replied, her tone even. "Please. Sit." He sat, the plush velvet of the chair feeling undeserved. A waiter started to approach, but Eleanor dismissed him with a subtle shake of her head. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, across the polished mahogany. The chasm between them was filled with 25 years of assumptions, betrayals, and unspoken truths. It was Adrian who finally broke the silence. "You look well." It was a clumsy, inadequate opening. "I am well," she confirmed, offering nothing more. He took a breath, deciding to abandon the pretense of pleasantries. "I never understood," he said, the admission costing him the last dregs of his pride. "How could I have lived with you for so long and never seen you?" Eleanor considered his question, swirling the champagne in her glass. "You saw what you wanted to see, Adrian," she said, her voice devoid of accusation, stating it as a simple fact. "You saw a beautiful backdrop for your life, a well-managed asset. You never thought to look behind the painting to see the wall it was hanging on. It never occurred to you that the wall might be holding up the entire house." The metaphor was so precise, so devastatingly accurate, it left him breathless. That was it, exactly. He had only ever seen the surface. "The affairs, they were wrong. I know that," he mumbled, feeling the need to confess something, even if it was the most obvious of his sins. "Yes, they were," she agreed. "But they weren't the real betrayal. They were just symptoms of it." She finally met his gaze, her eyes clear and sharp. "The real betrayal, Adrian, was your complete and utter lack of curiosity." He flinched. The real betrayal was not his lust, but his indifference. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. Not for the money I lost, or the job. I'm sorry for the curiosity I never had." For the first time, a flicker of something new appeared in her expression. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a quiet, somber acknowledgement. She nodded slowly. "Thank you for that. It's the first true thing you've said to me in a very long time." He knew then that this was all he would get. It was more than he deserved. He stood up, the interaction lasting no longer than a single course of a meal. "Enjoy your evening," he said, the words echoing the chef's ironic farewell from a year ago. This time there was no irony, only a quiet finality. He turned and walked away, not looking back. He didn't see Eleanor watch him go, her expression one of profound and final closure. He didn't see her turn her gaze back to the city lights, her city. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, the taste crisp and clean on her palate. It tasted like the future. And so, Adrian Vance's world, built on a foundation of arrogance and deceit, came crashing down not in a courtroom, but in a 5-star restaurant. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the greatest strength often lies in what is unseen, and the most dangerous person is always the one you underestimate. Eleanor's journey wasn't one of revenge. It was a quiet, calculated reclamation of her own power and identity. It shows us that true security isn't given to you. It's built, brick by silent brick. If this story of secrets, lies, and ultimate justice resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps the channel grow. Share this story with someone who appreciates a tale where the underdog comes out on top. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story where the truth comes served on a silver platter. Thank you for listening, or